I want to introduce Matt Baretto, co-founder and managing partner of Latino Decisions and professor of Chicano Studies and Political Science at UCLA, which stole him from the University of Washington and brought him down here and put him within our radar, which we're very happy about. He's currently a consultant to the Clinton campaign doing their Latino polling and focus groups. I just have to also indicate that Matt is an outstanding political scientist in the area of minority politics, published widely and widely respected in our somewhat boring field of academia. So he's one of us in many ways. And before we start, I wonder if we could quickly go around the room and have people just introduce yourselves. We have a small enough group where we can try to figure out who's in the room. So Rodrigo, just a word about just your name and your affiliation. Rodrigo, why don't you start?
Part of the management department at Cal State LA, and I'm a principal at eViterus, which is a polling firm here in Los Angeles.
Okay.
Shakari Byerly, principal with eViterus as well.
I'm Gar Colbert, and I'm in the political science department at Cal State LA, and I help consult on the polls with Pat Brown Institute.
Suhey Espinoza, Deputy Director for Policy at Cal State Los Angeles.
Brian Huey, I'm a fellow with the Pat Brown Institute and a PhD candidate at UC Irvine.
Oscar Valladares with SEIU 721 Labor, and also I'm a mental health social worker with County of Los Angeles.
Efrain Escobedo, Vice President, Civic Engagement and Public Policy at California Community Foundation.
Let's go in the back.
Adriana Mendoza, Associate State Director with AARP California, representing 1.39 members in LA County.
David Azevedo, Senior Program Specialist for AARP California as well.
Their presence here indicates a real big movement in AARP to be much more a part of the civic arena. They've reached out to us and others, and we're very happy to have you in our world.
Good morning, Angelica Peña with Naleo Educational Fund.
David Ayllon, I'm at the Center for the Study of Los Angeles at Loyola Marymount, and I also work with Latino Decisions.
Marcus Rodriguez, I'm Director of Government Affairs with ASI at Cal State LA.
Caleb Rabinowitz, I'm a reporter with Yomiuri Shimbun and an MPP candidate at UCLA Law School.
Luis Gomez, California Community Foundation.
Fernando Cáceres, the Trust for Public Land.
I'm Rinjo from the University of San Francisco.
Pedro Gonzalez with the Resources Legacy Fund. We're environmental polling.
Good morning, Nadia Fund, Executive Director of the Alliance for Better Communities.
Good morning, Julio Tirón with Pepe Gallo Radio.
Oh, great.
Peter Hong, Cal State LA.
Good morning, Robert Lopez, Cal State LA.
Introduce yourselves.
Good morning, Diana Flores from Principal.
And
I'm Anna Guzman, I'm
okay. Thank you all for being here. Now I'm going to ask Matt to do something very quick, which is not always our favorite subject, which is to quickly answer Rodrigo's question about methodology. Because we all want to know the answer to it. And actually, I always learn when I ask these questions. And then I want to go into some other questions as well. So Matt, why don't you start with that?
Thanks. Thanks for having us here this morning, Rafe. And thanks for everyone for being here to discuss these important poll results. As you're probably finding as well, you know, the polling world is changing, and how we communicate and interview our respondents is changing. From what started on just calling people on their landline telephones is now quite different. So in this particular study, we have a blend between landline phones, cell phones, and email invitations to folks. And we find that in particular for our younger respondents, for our millennials, they're very, very difficult to get to answer, even on their cell phones. They will communicate with us on their cell phones, but they will not hold it up to their ear and talk to us. And so for those segments, we get a stronger percentage of those completes via a self-complete of online interface, and so those do tend to be younger completes. And when we blend those samples together, we actually feel like we have a much more reliable sample that we have to apply far less weights to. We get the correct proportion of young people, we get the correct proportion of US borns, and so we think it's a really exciting innovation. You have to do it correctly because there are a lot of really lousy online surveys that are being done. You've probably seen them in the news, in the press. You see polls that are coming in all the time that have wildly different results. And so Adrian and I work really hard to make sure that the online completes that we're getting through our Latino Decisions online panels are very, very accurate and representative. But it's an extremely important point, and one that I'm of the belief now actually that if you see a telephone-only poll, you might start to want to question its accuracy to make sure it has an accurate representation of younger people. It's not to say that you can't do it on the telephones, but we should start to question that because so many young people are communicating in this way, and they prefer to answer the survey in that way.
Okay. I want to ask you about turnout. Now, we do have one slide here that asks people their likelihood of voting, and there could be a social acceptability thing, and people always report all kinds of weird stuff about their own behavior. You've told me, Matt, that you think that the Latino turnout is going to be very high this year, and including in LA County. Beyond people saying their likelihood of voting, and when you're thinking nationwide as well, because you're polling around the country, why do you think that? I mean, what do you base that on, I guess, is what I would say.
Well, I'll say two things. The first is that we always like to compare, even though the self-reported data is self-reported, we don't know if it will actualize on election day. We can compare it to what people self-reported in 2012. And so the first indication is that across most metrics compared to the polling that we were doing in 2012, the number of Latinos who are self-reporting enthusiasm, self-reporting certainty to vote is up. There's an increase there. And Adrian can talk more about perhaps the NALEO tracking poll that he's leading, where we're seeing that, and he's actually just written an analysis of that exact item. And so we're seeing that in the self-reported data, number one. So it is self-reported, but we're saying it. Two, if you look at the early vote that is coming in most Latino heavy states or counties or even precincts, the early vote is 50 to, in some cases, 100% higher than it was at this point in 2012. Across Florida, across North Carolina, Colorado, Nevada, and Texas. If you look at the border counties in Texas, from Hidalgo all the way over to El Paso, the Latino early vote is up 50 to 100%. So we are seeing indications that Latinos are voting, at least in the early voting, at higher rates.
Talk about that NALEO tracking poll.
Well, I mean, yeah, we have a, you know, I've been looking at all the data very carefully that we've been asking across the weeks, the questions that capture engagement for Latinos. One of the more interesting ones that stands out in my mind is a question that hasn't been asked before, and we asked Latinos, is the 2016 election more important to you than the 2012 election, or is the 2012 election more important to you? You know, in terms of, you know, how important does this election seem to you? And about 3/4, about 75, 76% of Latinos across the board essentially are saying, this election feels more important to me. So that's an indication to me. And again, there's other data points that we can look at that say, look, there's higher levels of enthusiasm, interest in the election, following the election. But this idea that this election seems more important to Latinos, for us experts, it looks more important. It seems more important. But when the population as a whole tells us it's more important, then we're onto something. The dots are being connected there.
Let me ask a follow-up question. When you asked that in 2012, did people say that was more important than 2008?
Well, some of the other questions that were similar, that exact same question did not appear in 2012, but we were asking other questions about 2012 to 28, and it was not as high in 2012 relative to 2008. 2008, again, very historic, first African-American potential president, so people are engaged, and so that tended to go down by 2012.
I think the 2012 one that we do have the same is the one about enthusiasm, right, not importance. And so that's one that people, you see that enthusiasm reported in the news. And so we've long asked that exact question. And we were seeing an increase on that in 2016. But what Adrian's referring to is a new question that people started saying, it's not just enthusiasm. Do you actually think this election is more important, or is that just what the pundits are saying? So he put that question on the poll, and lo and behold, as he said, over 70% agreed. He said, yes.
Yeah, enthusiasm is in political psychology terms, we say it's positive affect. I don't know if people are looking at this election quite positively, you know, given all the negativity. So that question may not fully capture what's motivating Latinos. Like, oh, I'm excited to go vote, and well, I don't think it's exciting. How about importance? And that's where we see that uptick.
Big spike.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Measure M, which is the marquee race really in Southern California this year. Most people I talk to who are on the pro-M side are worried that they might fall short, as they did a number of years ago, of the 2/3. If somehow Measure M passes, should there be an event after it at which the award is given to Donald Trump?
That's a good way of phrasing it. I don't want to give any awards. For the record, I'm not giving any awards to Donald Trump.
You don't have to actually attend the dinner. I'm just saying.
The mobilization that is being induced by his campaign of the Latino electorate is energizing Latinos across the country, certainly here in Los Angeles. And so when we look at the down ballot, the other initiatives, Latinos are going to carry the day in a lot of those initiatives. So at the end of the day, we can celebrate Latino turnout and for the success of Measure M, but I will not, I'll stop short of attributing that to
I would say,
Donald Trump.
if I could follow up on that and maybe throw another question to Adrian on this, is that we know we don't have a competitive presidential election. The Senate race, for as much attention as it got in the primary, doesn't appear to be as competitive and is not getting as much attention. And so once again, California statewide is stuck with an election where there's not a super high-profile competitive statewide initiative or issue that seems to be close. And so the question will be whether or not there's just sort of that average level of turnout where there's no urgency, or if something changes. And I wonder if Adrian could just follow up a little bit more, because he has written, in many respects, one of the marquee academic articles on Prop 187 and Pete Wilson, when there was urgency and when there was that heightened Latino turnout for many cycles. And I wonder if we think, because we think we see it in the data, but I wonder if here in Los Angeles, far removed from the competitiveness of the presidential election, we'll still see that bump in Latino turnout just because of how much backlash there has been.
No, we are going to see it, and at this is a good opportunity to essentially, the story of 187, and that's a story that's well known, the role of the Latino electorate being mobilized by the anti-immigrant initiative. Those of us that were, I know there's young people in the audience, but youngish people in the audience, but those of us that were there, it really just wasn't only the initiative, but the commercials that were run in support of the initiative, the rhetoric. This is echoes of what happened in California. That's something I've been speaking to audiences across the nation, making those comparisons. But the other part of the story of 187 and the subsequent initiatives are the role of community organizations, the role of unions, the role, ultimately, there's got to be organizations registering people to vote, getting people to the polls. And so that role was critical during that context, not only the rhetoric, and unions are critical in this election as well. So in LA County, that registration, that mobilization that you're seeing, it's not only Donald Trump's rhetoric, but it's also the work of the organizations like unions that are very active in mobilizing and engaging Latinos. So in many ways, when we look at California, seems, again, it's a solidly blue state. Well, the election's already determined. Why bother to vote? Well, Latinos are very much engaged in California, so and in Los Angeles in particular.
I'd like to talk about media a little bit before we take some questions from the audience. This whole question of people who get their news from Spanish language media, there's something going on, and when you look at the coverage, it is very issue-oriented in the Spanish language media. And I would imagine if one were a Latino voter relying only on English language media, you would find issues of importance to you actually not highlighted as much. In other words, there has to be something going on to affect these attitudes and mobilization, that it's both a cause and an effect. It's not just that people are paying attention to Spanish language media. They're drawing something from it that in the old days, in the 60s, we would have called consciousness raising. Do you see that?
We definitely do. When we ask Latino voters which language of media they trust more to deliver information, they tend to say, even English-speaking Latinos tend to say Spanish language media. They trust more to deliver information, especially information about their community. And while the rates of consumption of Spanish language media are certainly much more higher in immigrant households, there still tends to be a good number that move back and forth or still get exposure to that, perhaps at their parents' house. And so we do still see that as a very, very important, not only consciousness raising, community building, and mobilizing tool. I will add, though, that we're now starting to see a little bit more diversification. We have much more interest in reaching English-speaking Latinos on English language sources this year in 2016 than I've ever seen. It used to be that when you went to a campaign and said, where's our Latino media budget, what they meant was their Spanish language budget. Right. They had nothing for outreach. And that is changing dramatically, not just at the presidential level, but in a lot of Senate and down-ticket races where there are English language commercials targeting Latinos. There are English language efforts online, as we talked about. Millennials, Adrian pointed out, are getting most of their information from the internet. So that's starting to change. Does that mean the cable news and the local TV stations are there yet? No, to your point. But I think there are efforts to start engaging Latinos in English in a Latino way. You have places like Fusion and others who are starting to get into that market.
Yeah, and until that transition occurs, and it's positive that it's moving in that direction, look, immigrant Latinos, Spanish-speaking Latinos are not showing up to Trump rallies. So where are they getting their information? They're getting that information from Spanish language media. So the analysis, the content, that's coming from that media. I think that has a direct translation and a direct impact in terms of their mobilization rate. So when we look at larger numbers of immigrant Latinos saying, I'm going to turn out and vote, or I'm engaged in this election, again, they're receiving that information, those messages from somewhere. And I think the richness that you're speaking to, the policy issues that are found in Spanish language media, I think that's certainly playing and increasing Latino voter turnout.
I mean, it concerns me a bit when you talk about generational transformation that will be lost over time. Because over time, as people become less likely to draw that information, they'll be getting information from a mainstream media which is not very engaged. I mean, for a lot of sort of professional reasons and other reasons, that doesn't have the same level of engagement to the community. So maybe down the road, I'm usually
I think you're starting to see
optimistic,
that pick up, though, in the digital space. You're seeing a lot of Latino-centric content in the digital space, and so I think that will get replaced. Something will come and take that place for those folks who are looking for community-oriented information.
The word liberal jumped out at me here because young Latino voters call themselves more liberal than older Latino voters. But according to the rest of your data, that's really only true on social issues. On everything else, to an old-fashioned liberal, you would say that on most liberal issues, sort of working class issues, kind of expenditure issues, the older folks, the foreign-born, not the native-born, are more, quote, liberal, but liberal maybe means to people social liberalism. I mean, it was an odd kind of looking at the mix of the numbers.
Well, I think that speaks to what's commendable are the comparative analysis that your institute's going to be doing. One of the things we've been grappling for some time is just trying to understand what those political ideologies mean to a Latino population. So you have large numbers of Latinos saying, I'm conservative, but then when you look at some of the policies, you're like, wait a minute, well, that doesn't quite align with that conservatism, or the same thing with the liberalism. Well, I think liberal and conservatism means something a little bit different to Latinos than it does for other
And I can
groups.
tell you that in our Asian American poll, there was much more consistency that the younger voters were more democratic, more liberal on democratic issues and on social issues than in this poll.
Yeah, I think you see, I mean, there's definitely a generational divide. One of the interesting things is to look through the crosstabs that Adrian presented. And you see that generational divide also sort of layered onto an acculturation divide in terms of there are sort of pockets of younger US-born, more comfortable in English Latinos and older immigrant, more Spanish-oriented Latinos. And you do see those differences where younger Latinos are definitely much more in favor of things like same-sex marriage, immigrant rights, and these sorts of issues. And I wouldn't say they're less supportive of expenditure issues. They're just less committed to those issues. They're issues they haven't thought about because they're pocketbook issues that they perhaps haven't faced in terms of owning their own home, having to pay bond taxes and things like that. And so a lot of those things, I think, will change. I wouldn't say that that's a generation that's going to be lost to those issues, but as they mature in the electorate, we would expect them to continue to hold on to their sort of social values, but then start to explore the role of government, redistribution, and things like that.